My name is Lydia Anderson, and for 33 years, my family called me the ugly one. Not behind my back, not as a cruel joke whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. They said it directly to my face. My older brother Cameron was the smart one. My younger sister Rachel was the beautiful one. And I was the disappointment. The practice child. The mistake they wished they could quietly erase from every family photograph. The first time I heard my father call me that, I was only 9 years old. One of his business partners pointed at me during a backyard barbecue and asked who I was. My father laughed and said, "That's our practice child." We learned from our mistakes after her. Everyone laughed, including me. I didn't understand why at the time. Later that night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mother said, "Thank God Cameron turned out better." My father replied, "Yeah, Lydia taught us what not to do." I stood in the hallway listening while tears rolled down my face. From that moment on, I spent years trying to earn their love. Nothing worked. When I earned top grades, nobody cared. When Rachel got average grades, she received gifts and celebrations. When Cameron won a debate competition, my father rented a banquet room and invited half the neighborhood. When I was accepted into MIT, my mother simply asked if I planned on doing something about my appearance before college. Every achievement I earned was treated like an inconvenience. Every mistake my siblings made was excused. Eventually, I stopped trying to impress them. I left home. I moved across the country. I worked 3 jobs. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I built my life from nothing. Meanwhile, my family continued pretending I barely existed. Then came the family reunion. Every year, my parents hosted an extravagant gathering designed to show off their perfect family. This year was held at a luxury oceanfront estate overlooking the Pacific. More than 50 relatives attended. By the time I arrived, Cameron was already entertaining everyone with stories about his financial success. Rachel was showing off her engagement ring to every woman within 50 feet. My parents stood proudly at the center of the courtyard, smiling like royalty. I wasn't surprised. Some things never change. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and stood quietly near a marble pillar overlooking the ocean. That's when I saw Aunt Pamela approaching. If cruelty had a face, it would look exactly like Pamela. She lived for humiliation. She enjoyed it the way some people enjoy dessert. Walking beside her was a sharply dressed woman carrying a leather briefcase. I immediately recognized her. But I kept my expression neutral. Pamela clearly didn't know who she was. She assumed the woman was another wealthy guest worth impressing. As soon as she reached me, Pamela smiled. It was the same smile she always wore right before trying to embarrass someone. "There she is," Pamela announced loudly. Several relatives turned to look. "The famous Lydia." A few cousins snickered. Pamela pointed toward Cameron. "That's our genius." Then toward Rachel. "And that's our beauty." The woman nodded politely. Then Pamela pointed directly at me. "And this," she laughed. "This is the one we don't talk about." Several people chuckled. My mother heard it. She didn't stop her. My father heard it. He didn't stop her. Rachel smiled. Cameron looked amused. The woman beside Pamela remained silent. Pamela continued. "She works with computers or something. Never really amounted to much. Every family has one disappointment." More laughter. I stood perfectly still. For 33 years they expected me to lower my head whenever they mocked me. They expected me to shrink, apologize, disappear. But this time something was different. The woman standing beside Pamela wasn't laughing. In fact, she looked disgusted. Pamela finally noticed. "What?" she asked nervously. The woman slowly reached into her blazer and removed a business card. She handed it to Pamela. Pamela glanced down. Her smile disappeared instantly. The color drained from her face. "What is this?" she whispered. The woman looked directly at her and said, "My name is Diana Morgan. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Aegis Data Defense." Nobody reacted. Then Diana pointed directly at me. "And I work for Lydia." Complete silence. My father's eyes widened. Cameron stopped breathing. Rachel lowered her hand. For the first time in my life, my family looked at me as if they were seeing a stranger. Then Diana smiled and said the one sentence that would destroy every lie they had believed about me for 33 years. Actually, she's the reason I'm here today. And less than 1 minute later, my family's entire world began to collapse. For a few seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The ocean breeze continued drifting across the courtyard, but it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the estate. My Aunt Pamela stared at Diana's business card as if it were written in a foreign language. Then she looked at me, then back at the card, then back at me again. "There must be some mistake," she finally said. Her voice sounded weak, nervous, uncertain. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen Aunt Pamela uncertain about anything. Diana didn't respond immediately. She simply stood there with the calm confidence of someone who never needed to raise her voice to command a room. My father pushed through the crowd first. "What's going on?" he demanded. His eyes moved from Diana to me and back again. "What kind of company is this?" Diana smiled politely. "Aegis Data Defense." My father frowned. He had never heard the name before. Neither had most of my relatives. Cameron folded his arms and laughed. "Sounds like another tech startup." Several cousins laughed with him. The familiar pattern was returning. They wanted to believe nothing had changed. They desperately needed to believe nothing had changed. Because if they admitted otherwise, the entire family hierarchy would collapse. Diana looked directly at Cameron. "Not exactly." Cameron's smile faded slightly. Diana continued. "Aegis Data Defense currently provides cybersecurity infrastructure for several Fortune 500 companies, financial institutions, and private investment groups." Nobody laughed this time. My father blinked. My mother stared at Diana. Rachel's smile slowly disappeared. Cameron shifted uncomfortably. The crowd was beginning to realize this wasn't a joke. This wasn't some misunderstanding. Diana opened her briefcase and removed a folder. "Miss Anderson requested that I deliver several documents today." My father immediately interrupted. "What documents?" Diana ignored him completely. Instead, she handed the folder directly to me. The gesture alone sent a visible shockwave through the crowd. My family had spent decades treating me like the least important person in every room. Now a powerful attorney was standing in front of 50 witnesses treating me like the most important person there. I accepted the folder without looking inside. I already knew what it contained. The real surprise wasn't the documents. The real surprise was watching my family's faces. My mother stepped forward. "Lydia," she said slowly, "why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" I almost laughed. The question was so ridiculous it felt insulting. "Tell you what?" I asked. "About your company." I looked directly into her eyes. "You never asked." Complete silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, because she knew I was right. Every person standing there knew I was right. Cameron suddenly forced a laugh. "Come on. Nobody builds a major company without anyone hearing about it." He looked around for support. "Right?" Nobody answered. Diana did. "Miss Anderson founded the company 11 years ago." Cameron swallowed. Diana continued. "The company currently employs more than 400 people." The silence deepened. "And last quarter alone," Diana paused, "the company generated revenue exceeding $80 million. My Aunt Susan dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the stone patio. Nobody reacted. Nobody even looked at it. Every eye remained fixed on Diana. $80 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. My father looked physically ill. Cameron's face turned pale. Rachel stared at me as if she had never seen me before. For 33 years they had convinced themselves I was the failure, the ugly duckling, the embarrassment. Now that story was dying right in front of them. Cameron recovered first. He always did. "Revenue doesn't mean profit," he snapped. Lots of companies inflate numbers. There it was, desperation, the first sign of panic. Diana reached back into her briefcase. "You're correct." Cameron smiled. Then Diana added, "Which is why Miss Anderson's company also carries zero corporate debt and maintains one of the strongest cash positions in the industry." Cameron's smile vanished instantly. A few relatives exchanged nervous glances. My father slowly removed his glasses. He looked tired, older somehow. "How successful are we talking?" he asked quietly. Diana answered without hesitation. "Successful enough that Miss Anderson recently completed a private acquisition worth more than $22 million. A wave of gasps swept through the crowd. My mother grabbed the edge of a nearby table. Rachel looked like she might faint. Pamela's mouth literally fell open. $22 million. They couldn't process it. The numbers were too large, too impossible, too far away from the version of me they had created in their minds. Then Diana delivered the next blow. "In fact," she said calmly, "the acquisition was finalized approximately 1 hour ago." My father frowned. "What acquisition?" For the first time, Diana smiled. Not a polite smile, not a professional smile. A smile that suggested she already knew exactly how the next few minutes would unfold. Then she looked around the estate. The gardens, the courtyard, the oceanfront property, the terraces, the guests, the massive mansion itself. And finally she said, "The acquisition of this estate." Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. My father stared at her, then at me, then at the mansion behind us. Rachel's engagement ring suddenly looked insignificant. Cameron looked like he might be sick. Aunt Pamela grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. My mother whispered a single word. "What?" Diana folded her hands calmly in front of her. "As of 1 hour ago, Lydia Anderson became the majority owner of the property you're currently standing on." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For 33 years, my family had looked down on me from the top of a mountain they believed I would never climb. And in less than 5 minutes, they were discovering the mountain belonged to me. Nobody spoke for nearly 10 seconds. The entire courtyard stood frozen beneath the California sun, as if time itself had stopped moving. My father was the first to react. "That's impossible," Richard said. His voice lacked its usual confidence. He sounded like a man desperately trying to convince himself. "This estate wasn't even on the market." Diana remained perfectly calm. "Private acquisitions rarely are." My father stared at her, then at me, then back at her again. Cameron stepped forward. His jaw was tight. His eyes were filled with disbelief and growing panic. "Who sold it?" he demanded. Diana glanced at him briefly. "The previous holding group." Cameron's face changed immediately. It wasn't obvious to most people, but I noticed it. For a fraction of a second, genuine fear flashed across his face. "That's not possible," he said. "We've been negotiating with them for months." Diana tilted her head slightly. "Apparently your negotiations weren't convincing enough." A few relatives exchanged confused looks. They didn't understand why Cameron suddenly looked so nervous. But I did. Cameron had spent months trying to secure this property through his firm. He wanted the commission, the prestige, the recognition from our father. And now that opportunity had vanished. Not because he lost it to another investor. He lost it to me, the sister he had mocked his entire life. "You bought it just to embarrass me." Cameron's voice echoed across the courtyard. There it was. The first accusation. The first attempt to make himself the victim. I looked directly at him. "I didn't even know you were involved." "That's a lie." "Actually," Diana interrupted, "it's not." Cameron's eyes narrowed. Diana continued. "The acquisition process began several weeks before your firm submitted its final proposal." Cameron clenched his jaw. He knew she was telling the truth. That was the problem. Everyone could see it. My father suddenly stepped closer. "Lydia." His tone changed completely. Softer, warmer, almost fatherly. It was a tone I hadn't heard in years. "Why didn't you tell us?" I almost laughed. Again. The same question. Different person. Same hypocrisy. "You never asked." Richard rubbed his forehead. "We're your family." Family. The word sounded strange coming from him. For most of my life, family had only existed when they wanted something from me. Not when I needed help. Not when I needed support. Not when I needed love. Suddenly, my mother appeared beside him. Barbara's eyes looked suspiciously wet. "Sweetheart," she whispered. Sweetheart, I couldn't remember the last time she called me that. Maybe when I was 10, maybe younger. We had no idea. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who spent decades praising Rachel while criticizing everything I did. The woman who told me men would never find me attractive. The woman who refused to co-sign my student loans because I wasn't worth the risk. And now she wanted sympathy. Whose fault is that? I asked quietly. Barbara froze. The crowd fell silent again. Nobody wanted to be the first person to acknowledge the truth. My mother had ignored me for years. My father had ignored me for years. My siblings had ignored me for years. They didn't know anything about my life because they never cared enough to ask. Rachel finally stepped forward. Unlike Cameron, she wasn't angry. Not yet. She looked confused. Lost. "How rich are you?" she asked. The question was so direct, several relatives visibly cringed. Diana answered before I could. "That's private information." Rachel swallowed. "Richer than Cameron?" Diana smiled slightly. "Considerably." A visible shock moved through the crowd. Cameron's face turned bright red. For 36 years he had been the golden child, the success story, the future of the family. Now everyone standing there was silently recalculating their opinions. Suddenly Aunt Pamela forced a nervous laugh. "Well, isn't this wonderful?" she said. Nobody joined her. Pamela looked around desperately. A successful niece. That's what family is all about. I stared at her. 10 minutes earlier she called me the ugly duckling. Now she wanted to celebrate my success. The speed of the transformation was almost impressive. "Really?" I asked. Pamela shifted uncomfortably. "Of course. Because a few minutes ago you said I was the family disappointment." Several cousins looked away immediately. Pamela's face turned red. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was brutal. For the first time in years, she had nowhere to hide. Then something interesting happened. The relatives who normally followed my parents began moving closer to me. An uncle started asking questions about my company. Two cousins suddenly wanted to know where I lived. An aunt complimented my suit. Another asked if I was dating anyone. The shift was immediate and obvious. Respect hadn't appeared because they discovered who I was. Respect appeared because they discovered how much money I had. My mother noticed it too, and she hated losing control of the room. For decades, she had been the center of every family gathering. Now attention was drifting toward me. Barbara quickly stepped forward and wrapped an arm around my shoulder. The gesture shocked me. She hadn't voluntarily touched me in years. "I've always been proud of Lydia," she announced loudly. The lie landed like a slap across my face. Several relatives looked uncomfortable. They remembered. They remembered every joke, every insult, every family dinner where I was ignored. My mother was trying to rewrite history in real time. And the worst part? She expected it to work. "Always?" I repeated. Barbara's smile twitched. "Of course. Even when you called MIT a waste of money?" Her smile weakened. "Even when you refused to help me pay tuition?" The courtyard grew quiet again. "Even when you told me no man would ever love me because I wasn't pretty enough?" Complete silence. My mother slowly removed her arm from my shoulder. The mask was beginning to crack. The truth was starting to leak through. And for the first time all afternoon, I realized something important. My family wasn't shocked because I was successful. They were shocked because success had taken away the one thing they used to control me: their approval. And now they had absolutely nothing left. My mother's face changed the moment I said the word approval. It was quick, but I saw it. A tiny crack in the perfect mask. For 33 years, Barbara Anderson had controlled every room she entered by deciding who deserved warmth and who deserved shame. She gave affection like a reward and silence like a punishment. When I was a child, I would have done anything for one approving look from her, one kind sentence, one moment where she saw me as her daughter instead of a problem she had failed to correct. But standing in that courtyard, with 50 relatives watching, and Diana beside me holding the truth in her briefcase, I realized my mother finally understood something terrifying. I no longer needed anything from her. "Lydia," she said softly, forcing a smile that looked painful on her face. This is not the time to bring up old misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. That was what she called years of humiliation. My father immediately stepped in beside her, his voice low and warning. Your mother is right. We should discuss this privately. I looked around the courtyard. Privately? I asked. Aunt Pamela called me the ugly duckling in front of everyone 5 minutes ago, and none of you asked for privacy then. Pamela's mouth tightened. Rachel looked away. Cameron rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. My father's jaw flexed. He hated when I used facts he could not bully away. Enough, he said. You have made your point. No, I replied. You only think I have because now the embarrassment belongs to you. The words landed hard. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. My mother's eyes sharpened. The soft act was already dying. She stepped closer and lowered her voice, but not enough to keep the others from hearing. Do not turn this into a performance. I almost smiled. That is funny coming from a woman who spent my entire childhood performing motherhood for an audience. Her face flushed. How dare you? How dare I remember? I asked. Silence. Diana did not move. She did not speak. She simply stood there like a locked door. Nobody in my family had the key to open. My father tried a different strategy. He let out a forced laugh and turned toward the relatives. Well, this has certainly become emotional. Lydia has always been sensitive. There it was, the old trick. If they could not deny the truth, they would make me look unstable for saying it. I looked directly at him. Sensitive is what you called me when I cried after you told your friends I was a practice child. His smile disappeared. Careful. I am being careful, I said. That is why I am using your exact words. The courtyard went still. My father's nostrils flared. He had always been dangerous when cornered, not because he would lose control completely, but because he knew how to make cruelty sound like authority. You want to humiliate your parents in front of the family? He asked. After everything we gave you? I nodded slowly. Let's talk about what you gave me, my mother whispered. Lydia, stop. But I did not stop. Not this time. You gave Cameron praise for breathing. You gave Rachel confidence for existing. You gave me criticism and called it motivation. You gave me loneliness and called it independence. You gave me nothing when I needed help, then took credit when I survived without you. Barbara's hand flew to her chest as if I had wounded her. We did our best. No, I said. You did your best for them. You did what was left for me. For the first time, several relatives looked at my parents differently. Not with open judgment yet, but with doubt. That was worse for them. Doubt was how their perfect image began to rot. Cameron noticed it and stepped forward, eager to rescue the family narrative before it collapsed completely. This is pathetic, he said. You buy one property and suddenly you think you get to rewrite history? I turned to him. I am not rewriting it. I am finally saying it where everyone can hear. Cameron laughed sharply. You always wanted attention. No, I said. I wanted a family. That shut him up. Only for a second, but it was enough. Rachel scoffed, folding her arms so her diamond ring flashed in the sunlight. Please, you hated being around us. You always acted superior. I looked at my sister, the beautiful girl my mother had polished like a trophy. Rachel, when I was 16, you told your friends I was adopted because you were embarrassed people might think we were related. Her face went pale. That was a joke. You said it at my birthday dinner. She looked away. I was young. You were 20. A low murmur moved through the relatives. Rachel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. My mother quickly grabbed her hand as if protecting her from me instead of from the truth. You are attacking everyone, Barbara snapped. No, I said. I am answering the attack that started before I even walked through the gate. Pamela suddenly found her voice. I never meant anything by it. I turned back to her. You called me the one we do not talk about. It was just family teasing. Family teasing is when everyone laughs. Abuse is when one person bleeds and everyone else calls it humor. The courtyard went dead silent. Even the catering staff froze near the terrace doors. For the first time all day, I saw shame touch a few faces. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to prove they knew. They had always known. My father stepped toward me again, his patience gone. "You are becoming very arrogant for someone who just recently found success," Diana finally spoke. Miss Anderson did not recently find success. Everyone turned to her. She opened the folder in her hands and removed a clean stack of documents. For clarity, Lydia Anderson has been listed as founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Data Defense for 11 years. Her company has provided security infrastructure for several major financial institutions since before Cameron became a partner at his firm. Cameron's face tightened. Diana continued, "This is not new money. This is not a lucky sale. This is not a temporary rise. The only recent development is that your family has finally noticed." The line hit harder than any insult. My father looked like he wanted to rip the papers from Diana's hands, but he did not. Because even he understood that Diana was not family. He could not intimidate her with guilt. My mother swallowed, then changed tactics again. Her expression softened, but her eyes stayed cold. "Lydia, sweetheart, maybe we should all take a breath. Clearly there has been pain on both sides. Both sides." I almost admired the audacity. "There was not pain on both sides," I said. "There was cruelty on one side and survival on the other." Barbara's mask finally cracked. "You ungrateful girl." There she was, the real mother, not the proud mother, not the wounded mother. The mother who appeared whenever I refused to stay small. "We raised you," she snapped. "We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a roof over your head. And now you stand here acting like you were some abandoned orphan because we refused to worship every little thing you did." My chest tightened. Not because her words surprised me, but because a tiny part of me still remembered being 17 and wishing she would love me. That part hurt. It probably always would, but it no longer controlled me. I took one slow breath. "You are right," I said calmly. "You gave me a roof." Barbara blinked, thrown off by my agreement. I continued, "But you made sure I never felt at home under it." Her face changed again. For a brief moment, something like guilt flashed across her eyes. Then pride swallowed it whole. My father leaned close. "Apologize to your mother." I looked at him. "No." A gasp moved through the courtyard. Such a small word. Such a simple word. But in my family, no was rebellion. No was betrayal. No was unforgivable. Richard stared at me as if I had slapped him. "What did you say?" I said no. My voice was steady. "I am not apologizing for telling the truth." His hands curled into fists. "You think money makes you powerful?" "No," I said. "Money did not make me powerful. Walking away from your approval did." The expression on his face told me I had struck the exact nerve. Because that was the real loss for him. Not the estate, not the company, not the public embarrassment. His real loss was control. He could not reward me. He could not punish me. He could not threaten to cut me off, because he had already done that years ago. And he could not call me a failure anymore, because everyone standing there had just watched that lie die in daylight. Diana stepped closer and spoke quietly enough for only me to hear. "Your board call begins in 15 minutes. I nodded. Then I turned back to my family. "Enjoy the reunion," I said. My mother's eyes widened. "You are leaving?" "No," I said, glancing toward the mansion behind her. "I am going upstairs. I have a meeting." Cameron let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. Run away after making a scene." I looked at him one last time. "Cameron, I bought the scene." His face went red. I walked toward the glass doors of the estate, and for the first time in my life, my family moved out of my way. Not because they loved me, not because they respected me, because they were afraid of what else I might know. As I stepped into the cool marble foyer, I heard my mother behind me whisper, "This is not over." I did not turn around. I already knew she was right. My family had lost the first battle. But people like the Andersons do not surrender when the truth exposes them. They regroup, they smile, they pretend. Then they come back with sharper knives. And before the sun went down, they would prove exactly how far they were willing to go to put me back in my place. I spent the next 2 hours inside the estate's executive suite overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The board meeting itself was routine: quarterly projections, security contracts, expansion plans, the kind of discussions that had become normal in my life years ago, yet I found it almost impossible to focus. Not because of the business, because of what was happening downstairs. For 33 years, my family had viewed me as insignificant. In less than an hour, that belief had shattered. People like my parents did not handle shattered illusions well. They adapted. They manipulated. They found new angles. By the time the meeting ended, I already knew they would be waiting for me. The only question was what strategy they would choose. As I stepped out of the suite, Diana closed her laptop and slipped it into her briefcase. "Everything quiet downstairs?" I asked. Diana actually laughed. "Not exactly. That wasn't encouraging." We walked down the grand staircase together. Before we even reached the bottom, I heard laughter floating up from the terrace. Not nervous laughter, not shocked laughter, comfortable laughter. I immediately knew what had happened. They had regrouped. The moment I stepped outside, the transformation became obvious. It was like walking into a completely different reunion. Earlier, my family looked at me with shock. Now they looked at me with affection. Fake affection, the most dangerous kind. "Lydia." My mother's voice rang across the courtyard. Barbara hurried toward me wearing a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. She grabbed both of my hands before I could react. "There you are, sweetheart." Sweetheart again. Twice in one day. A new record. "We've been waiting for you." I glanced toward Diana. She looked exactly as amused as I felt. My mother immediately began guiding me toward the enormous dining terrace overlooking the ocean. The long dinner table stretched across the stone patio. White linens, crystal glasses, expensive silverware. Enough food to feed a small village. More than 50 relatives were already seated. My father stood when he saw me approach. So did several uncles. Aunts smiled. Cousins waved. Rachel looked emotional. Cameron looked exhausted but strangely polite. The entire performance was almost impressive. My mother led me directly to the center seat at the table. I stopped walking. "What's this?" Barbara smiled proudly. "Your seat." I looked down. My name had been placed at the head of the table, the position my father occupied at every family event for the past 30 years. The symbolism wasn't subtle. My father stepped forward. "You've earned it." I almost laughed. This morning I was the family disappointment. Now I was apparently royalty. The speed of the promotion was remarkable. I sat down slowly. My father sat on my right. My mother sat on my left. Rachel moved her chair closer. Much closer. Cameron remained across from me. Watching. Calculating. Waiting. The first 15 minutes of dinner felt surreal. Every conversation somehow circled back to me. An uncle asked about my company. A cousin asked about investing. An aunt complimented my suit. Another wanted career advice for her son. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly acted like we were lifelong friends. Rachel leaned closer and smiled warmly. "I'm proud of you, Lydia." I looked at her. The same sister who once told people she hoped nobody thought we were related. "Really?" Rachel nodded quickly. "Of course. Since when?" Her smile twitched. "You know what I mean." No, I actually didn't. Because nothing about this felt genuine. Everything felt rehearsed. Strategic. Artificial. Like actors reading lines they barely understood. Then my mother began telling stories. Not real stories. Rewritten stories. "Lydia was always special," Barbara announced. Several relatives nodded. I nearly choked on my water. Even as a little girl, she was incredibly intelligent. More nodding. "Her father and I always knew she would do amazing things." My grip tightened around my glass. "Always knew?" The woman once told me MIT was a waste of money. Now she wanted credit for my success. I looked across the table. Cameron was avoiding eye contact. Good. He knew exactly how ridiculous this sounded. But nobody challenged her. Nobody wanted conflict. They preferred the comfortable lie. Then my father stood. The entire table grew quiet. Richard lifted his champagne glass. Here it comes, I thought. Whatever they were planning, this was the setup. Family, my father began. Today has been a remarkable day. Smiles appeared around the table. For years, we've celebrated Cameron's achievements. Cameron nodded politely. We've celebrated Rachel's milestones. Rachel smiled. And today we celebrate Lydia. Applause erupted. Loud applause. Enthusiastic applause. The kind of applause they should have given me years ago. My father raised his hand. The noise faded. Then he continued. Success means responsibility. There it was. The hook. The bait. The reason for the performance. I sat perfectly still. My father smiled. The Anderson family has always believed in supporting one another. Several relatives nodded. When one person succeeds, everyone succeeds. More nodding. Which is why I am proud to announce that Lydia has agreed to help strengthen our family's future. My eyes narrowed. I hadn't agreed to anything. Not one thing. Cameron suddenly looked uncomfortable. Rachel looked nervous. My mother looked excited. My father continued speaking. Lydia has generously decided to support Cameron's expanding investment portfolio and help Rachel create the wedding of her dreams. The table erupted with applause again. Louder this time. Much louder. My mother started crying. Rachel covered her mouth dramatically. Several aunts smiled proudly. My father lifted his glass higher. To family. More applause. More cheers. More celebration. Everyone except me. Because I finally understood exactly what had happened. They weren't trying to rebuild a relationship. They weren't trying to apologize. They weren't trying to make things right. They were trying to convert me into an ATM. The promotion from family disappointment to family treasure had one condition attached. My money. Cameron needed capital. Rachel wanted a luxury wedding. My parents wanted control. They thought enough compliments would make me forget 33 years of humiliation. They thought public pressure would force me to comply. They thought they had trapped me. I slowly stood from my chair. The applause faded. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My father smiled confidently. Rachel looked hopeful. My mother looked triumphant. They were all waiting for me to thank them, to smile, to play my assigned role. Instead, I picked up my untouched champagne glass and looked directly at my father. That's interesting, I said. The smile on his face weakened. What's interesting? I slowly placed the glass back onto the table. The fact that everyone here knows what I'm supposedly paying for. I paused. The entire terrace fell silent. Then I looked directly into my father's eyes. Before I do. The silence after my question felt endless. My father's smile froze. My mother's hand slowly tightened around her champagne glass. Rachel stared at me. Cameron looked down at the table. That was all the answer I needed. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had planned this. Every compliment, every fake smile, every warm welcome. It was all part of the same strategy. Get Lydia emotional. Get Lydia comfortable. Get Lydia to open her wallet. My father recovered first. He always did. Lydia, he said with a forced chuckle. Don't be dramatic. Nobody is forcing you to do anything. Several relatives nodded immediately. They wanted the situation to become comfortable again, safe again. I slowly sat back down. Good, I said. Then we're all in agreement. Richard frowned. Agreement about what? I took a sip of water. That I won't be paying for Cameron's firm or Rachel's wedding. The effect was immediate. Rachel's face went white. My mother's jaw dropped. Cameron looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Around the table, conversations stopped. Even the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs seemed to disappear. My father forced another smile. You don't mean that. Actually, I do. Lydia, my mother whispered. Family helps family. I looked directly at her. Did family help me? Barbara froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For years, I had imagined asking that question. Now it was finally hanging in the air for everyone to hear. When I needed tuition money, did family help me? Silence. When I worked 3 jobs in Boston, did family help me? More silence. When I spent Christmas alone because I couldn't afford a plane ticket home, did family help me? Rachel looked away. Cameron suddenly became fascinated by his plate. My father clenched his jaw. They remembered. Every single one of them remembered. The problem wasn't that they forgot. The problem was that they never cared. That was different, my mother finally said. I almost laughed. Different how? Barbara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no answer. The truth was too ugly. The truth was that they had never expected me to succeed. Helping me would have been an investment, and nobody in my family invested in losing causes. Cameron suddenly pushed his chair back. This is ridiculous. His voice was sharper than before, angrier. Nobody owes you anything. I looked at him calmly. Exactly. Cameron blinked. What? Nobody owes me anything, I repeated, which means I don't owe anyone anything either. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. They knew I was right. They just didn't like hearing it. Cameron leaned forward. You're being selfish. Maybe, he snapped. You're sitting on millions of dollars while your family needs help. There it was, the real conversation finally arriving. Not love. Not reconciliation. Not family. Money. It had always been about money. How much does your firm need? I asked. Cameron hesitated. My father quickly jumped in. That's not the point. Which meant it was exactly the point. How much? I repeated. Cameron looked embarrassed. A few million. The entire table became silent again. A few million. Not alone. Not temporary help. Millions. My Aunt Susan nearly choked on her drink. Even some relatives who supported Cameron looked shocked. A few million? I repeated. Cameron immediately became defensive. It's temporary. How temporary? A few quarters. And if the market doesn't recover? Cameron's face darkened. It will. That wasn't confidence. That was hope. Dangerous people often confuse the two. For the first time all evening, Diana spoke. Mr. Anderson. Cameron turned toward her. Yes? Diana smiled politely. Have you informed your family about the commercial default in Chicago? The blood drained from Cameron's face. Instantly. Every relative noticed. Every single one. What default? My father asked. Cameron didn't answer. My mother looked confused. Rachel looked nervous. Diana remained calm. The one that triggered the 34% revenue decline. Complete silence. My father's face slowly turned toward his son. What is she talking about? Cameron swallowed hard. It's complicated. That was never a good answer. Not when millions of dollars were involved. Complicated? Richard repeated. His voice was becoming dangerous. What does that mean? Cameron looked trapped. For the first time in his life, the golden child didn't have an easy way out. It means he stopped, started again. It means we had some losses. Some losses. Diana didn't even bother hiding her skepticism. Several $1 million, she corrected. More silence. My father stared at Cameron. My mother stared at Cameron. Rachel stared at Cameron. The entire table stared at Cameron. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about me anymore, and Cameron hated that. I recognized the feeling because I had lived with it my entire childhood. The difference was that nobody rushed to save him. Nobody changed the subject. Nobody made excuses. For once, the spotlight remained exactly where it belonged. On the person who created the problem. Cameron stood abruptly. I don't need this. His voice shook slightly. I came here to celebrate family, not get interrogated. Then he turned toward me. The anger in his eyes surprised even me. You planned this. I blinked. Planned what? This whole thing. He pointed around the table. You wanted everyone looking at me like I'm a failure. The irony was almost unbelievable. For 33 years I had been the family failure. Now, after a single difficult conversation, Cameron couldn't handle 5 minutes of discomfort. My father stood slowly. Sit down, Cameron. The command carried weight. Real weight. Cameron froze. Because for the first time all day, my father wasn't protecting him. He was questioning him, and that terrified him far more than anything I had said. I watched the fear move across his face. Then I noticed something else. Rachel looked terrified too. Not upset, not worried. Terrified. As if she knew something nobody else knew. As if the conversation was moving toward a place she desperately didn't want it to reach. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, I realized Cameron wasn't the only person at that table hiding a secret. The moment I noticed Rachel's expression, a memory flashed through my mind. Rachel wasn't looking at Cameron like a worried sister. She was looking at him the way people look at a bomb that's about to explode. She knew something. The question was how much. Around the table, the atmosphere had completely changed. Earlier, everyone wanted a piece of my success. Now nobody was touching their food. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was talking. My father remained standing, staring directly at Cameron. "Sit down," he repeated. Cameron slowly lowered himself back into his chair. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Not because he was physically smaller, because the confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. The golden child mask was slipping. My mother immediately jumped in. "Richard, this isn't the time." Her voice sounded nervous. "Let's not do this tonight." My father ignored her. "How bad is it?" Cameron rubbed his forehead. "It's manageable." "That's not what I asked." Cameron didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Across the table, several relatives exchanged worried glances. The family genius suddenly didn't look very genius anymore. Diana calmly took a sip of water. "The losses became significant approximately 8 months ago." Cameron shot her a look filled with hatred. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Actually," Diana replied, "I do." Cameron looked away first. That alone told everyone everything. My father slowly sat down. He looked older than he had earlier that afternoon. "How much?" he asked quietly. Cameron stared at the table. "I don't know exactly. Nobody believed him. Not even my mother." "How much?" Richard repeated. This time his voice carried an edge. Cameron finally answered. "Several million." Gasps erupted around the table. Aunt Pamela nearly dropped her fork. Uncle Thomas swore under his breath. My mother's face turned pale. Rachel closed her eyes. Not surprised, not shocked, defeated. She already knew. My father stared at his son for several long seconds. Then something unexpected happened. He looked at me. Not Cameron. Me. The look said everything. He was already searching for a solution. And that solution was sitting at the head of the table. Me. Lydia. He began carefully. "Here we go." "No," I said immediately. Richard blinked. "You don't even know what I was going to say." "Yes, I do." Silence. "You want me to fix it." My father didn't answer, because he couldn't. Everyone already knew. Cameron looked embarrassed. My mother looked desperate. Rachel looked terrified. They all wanted the same thing. My money. Suddenly Rachel stood up. "Maybe we should stop talking about this." Her voice shook. "Too much. Far too much for someone discussing a simple business problem." I watched her carefully. The fear in her eyes was growing stronger. "Why?" I asked. Rachel froze. "What? Why should we stop?" She swallowed hard. "Because it's family business." Interesting. 10 minutes ago, she wanted family business discussed publicly if it meant getting a wedding paid for. Now she wanted privacy. That usually meant danger. "Family business?" I repeated. "Or your business?" Rachel's face lost what little color remained. My father immediately looked at her. Then Cameron. Then back to Rachel. For the first time, he noticed it too. The panic, the fear, the guilt. "Rachel?" Richard said slowly. "What does that mean?" Rachel didn't answer. My mother suddenly stood. "Enough." Her voice cracked. "Everybody stop." Nobody listened. The room had crossed a line. The truth was moving now. And once truth starts moving, it's almost impossible to stop. Cameron slammed his hand onto the table. "Leave her out of this." Every head turned toward him, including mine. "Leave her out of this. Not leave us. Not leave the family. Leave her." My heart rate increased slightly. There it was. The first real crack. Rachel looked at Cameron with panic. Cameron looked back with warning. My father noticed both. "What aren't you telling me?" Richard asked quietly. Nobody answered. The silence became unbearable. Then Diana spoke. "Actually," every eye turned toward her. She calmly set down her glass. "There is something that may help explain the financial situation." Cameron immediately stood up. "Don't!" The word exploded out of him. Diana looked unimpressed. "Mr. Anderson, don't!" His voice sounded desperate now, truly desperate. The kind of desperation people feel when they're standing on the edge of a cliff. My father slowly rose from his chair. "What is she talking about?" Cameron remained silent. Diana looked toward me. I understood immediately. She was asking permission. The decision belonged to me. For a moment I hesitated, not because of Cameron, because of something else. Despite everything, despite 33 years of humiliation, a small part of me still remembered the brother who used to walk me home from school when I was 8. The brother who once punched a bully for making me cry. Before our parents turned him into the golden child, before success became his religion, before he learned that appearances mattered more than people, for one brief moment, I almost protected him. Then I remembered the reunion, the ugly duckling, the disappointment, the humiliation, the years of silence, the years nobody protected me. I looked at Diana and nodded. Cameron closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped. He already knew it was over. Diana opened her briefcase and removed a thin folder. Not a thick folder. Not dozens of pages. Just one file. Somehow that made it worse. She placed it gently on the table. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 3 years ago, Diana began calmly. Vanguard Holdings experienced a liquidity crisis. My father frowned. "I know that." Diana nodded. "What you don't know is how it was resolved." Cameron stared at the floor. Rachel looked like she was about to cry. My mother was visibly shaking, and suddenly I understood. Whatever was inside that folder, it wasn't just Cameron's secret. It belonged to Rachel too. Diana opened the file. The first page became visible. Rachel let out a small broken sound. My father looked down. His eyes scanned the page. Then his face drained completely white. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Nobody answered, because every person at that table knew the next few minutes were about to destroy far more than Cameron's reputation. They were about to destroy Rachel's future too. My father's hands trembled as he stared at the document. The confidence that had carried him through decades of business deals, family gatherings, and country club meetings was gone. For the first time in my life, Richard Anderson looked genuinely afraid. "What is this?" he asked again. His voice sounded weaker now. Older. Diana remained calm. "A financial transfer agreement." Nobody spoke. My father's eyes moved across the page, then to Rachel, then back to the page, then back to Rachel again. "No," he whispered. Rachel immediately started crying, real crying this time. Not the carefully controlled tears she used when she wanted sympathy. These were different. Messy, panicked, desperate. "Dad," she whispered. Richard slammed the document onto the table. "Answer me." The entire terrace jumped. Even Cameron flinched. Rachel covered her face. My mother rushed toward her immediately. "Richard, stop." "No." His voice thundered across the courtyard. "I want an answer." Rachel sobbed harder. My father grabbed the document again. $1.8 million, he shouted. Gasps exploded around the table. Several relatives physically recoiled. My mother looked like she might faint. Aunt Pamela's mouth fell open. Uncle Thomas stared in disbelief. $1.8 million. Not a loan. Not a gift. $1.8 million. My father looked directly at Rachel. "Tell me this is wrong." Rachel couldn't. Because it wasn't. Diana quietly opened the folder to the second page. The transfers occurred over a 36-month period. Complete silence. The funds were categorized as consulting payments. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut. "I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "I swear I didn't know. Cameron suddenly stood. Leave her alone. My father rounded on him instantly. You gave her almost $2 million? Cameron didn't answer, which was answer enough. My father stared at him in disbelief. Have you completely lost your mind? Cameron laughed bitterly. You wanted her lifestyle. The words hit the table like a grenade. My mother's head snapped toward him. Rachel froze. Richard's face darkened. Cameron pointed directly at Rachel. Tell them. Rachel shook her head. Don't. Tell them. His voice grew louder, more emotional. Years of resentment were finally rising to the surface. Tell them about the apartment. Rachel began crying harder. Stop. Tell them about the shopping, Cameron shouted. Tell them about the private flights. Every relative watched in stunned silence. The perfect siblings were tearing each other apart. You told me Preston's family expected luxury, Cameron continued. You told me I had to help. You said the Anderson name would look weak if you couldn't keep up. Rachel looked horrified. You said the money was yours. Because you never asked questions. Rachel jumped to her feet. Because you're my brother, Cameron laughed. The sound was ugly, broken. No. Because you didn't care where it came from as long as you got it. The silence that followed was devastating. Rachel looked around desperately, searching for someone to save her, someone to defend her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Not even my mother. Then the worst possible voice entered the conversation. Preston, Rachel's fiancé. Until that moment, he had remained quiet, observing, listening, processing. Now he slowly stood from his chair. Every eye turned toward him. Rachel immediately moved toward him. Preston. Her voice trembled. Please. Preston looked at her, then at the documents, then back at her again. The disappointment on his face was almost painful to watch. Did you know? He asked quietly. Rachel immediately shook her head. No. Preston looked unconvinced. Did you know? Rachel hesitated, just for a second. But everyone saw it. Everyone. Preston closed his eyes. That tiny hesitation told him everything. Rachel grabbed his arm. Please listen to me. Preston slowly pulled his arm away. Rachel froze. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Preston. He took a step backward. My family has spent generations protecting our reputation. His voice remained calm. Too calm. If any of this becomes public. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rachel's face turned white. Please. Preston shook his head. I need time. Then he turned and walked away from the table. Rachel stared after him. Preston. He kept walking. Preston. Her voice cracked. Several guests turned to watch. The entire terrace had fallen silent again. Rachel began moving after him. Faster. Desperate. Preston, wait. He reached the stone pathway leading toward the front gates, never once looking back. Rachel broke into a run, high heels clicking wildly against the pavement. The beautiful daughter, the family princess, the woman who spent years mocking me because no man wanted me. Now she was chasing after the only man she truly wanted. And he wouldn't even turn around. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Everyone simply watched. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked exhausted. Cameron collapsed back into his chair. For a few moments, nobody said anything. Then my father slowly lowered himself into his seat. He looked at Cameron. Not with pride. Not with admiration. Not even with anger anymore. Just disappointment. Pure disappointment. The same disappointment I had spent most of my life seeing directed toward me. How much trouble are you in? Richard asked quietly. Cameron stared at the table. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he finally answered. More than you think. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. Because suddenly I realized something. The money wasn't the real problem. The money was only the symptom. Whatever secret Cameron had been hiding for the last 3 years, we still hadn't reached the bottom of it. And judging by the look on Diana's face, she knew exactly what was coming next. For the first time that entire day, I stopped feeling angry. I felt uneasy. Cameron wasn't acting like a man facing financial embarrassment anymore. He was acting like a man standing in front of a firing squad. The difference mattered. Financial problems could be fixed. Bad investments could be recovered from. What I saw in my brother's eyes looked far worse. My father noticed it too. Richard leaned forward slowly. What does that mean? Cameron rubbed both hands across his face. He suddenly looked 10 years older than he had that morning. It means the money isn't the biggest problem. Complete silence. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. What are you talking about? Cameron didn't answer immediately. He stared toward the dark Pacific Ocean beyond the terrace, almost like he wanted to be anywhere else. Finally, he looked at Diana. How much do they know? Diana didn't react. Enough. Cameron laughed bitterly. Of course they do. My father slammed his hand onto the table again. Stop speaking in riddles. His patience was gone. What happened? Cameron looked down. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. The money is gone. Silence. Absolute silence. My father blinked. What? Cameron swallowed. It's gone. Richard stared at him. You mean invested? Cameron shook his head. No. My father's face slowly drained of color. Lost? Cameron closed his eyes. Yes, my mother gasped. Rachel had still not returned from chasing Preston. Several relatives exchanged stunned looks. My father looked genuinely confused. How do you lose that much money? Nobody answered. Then Diana calmly opened another document inside the folder. Mr. Anderson, she said, looking directly at Cameron. You should tell them yourself. Cameron laughed again. This time it sounded broken, completely broken. Tell them what? He asked. That their golden son is a criminal? The word criminal hit the table like a thunderbolt. My mother physically staggered backward. Aunt Pamela covered her mouth. Uncle Thomas stared in disbelief. Richard looked like he had been punched. Watch your mouth, my father snapped automatically. Cameron looked up. Tears were forming in his eyes. You still don't get it. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Cameron pointed toward the folder. Everything she's saying is true. Silence. Then, more silence. The entire terrace seemed frozen in place. My father slowly sat back down. What did you do? His voice was barely above a whisper. Cameron looked away. I started gambling. My mother's knees almost gave out. Several relatives gasped. One of the aunts actually dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the stone floor. Nobody even looked. Gambling. Not investing. Not business losses. Gambling. Cameron stared at the table. At first it wasn't much. His voice sounded distant, hollow. Poker games. Private clubs. A few $1,000s. Nobody interrupted. He continued. Then I lost. His jaw tightened. And I wanted to win it back. Every person at that table already knew where the story was heading, but hearing it still felt terrible. I borrowed money. Cameron's voice cracked. Then I lost again. My father closed his eyes. My mother started crying. Cameron kept going. I thought one big win would fix everything. He laughed bitterly. One more game. One more chance. One more hand. His hands were shaking now. Then the numbers got bigger. Diana quietly slid another page across the table. My father looked down, then immediately wished he hadn't. Good God. His voice barely escaped his throat. What? My mother whispered. Richard stared at the paper. $4.7 million. The number echoed across the silent terrace. Several relatives physically recoiled. My mother burst into tears. Cameron looked completely defeated. I kept losing. Nobody spoke. The waves crashing below the cliffs sounded louder than ever. Then my father asked the question everyone feared. Where did the money come from? Cameron didn't answer. He didn't need to. Every person at that table already knew. Richard looked down at the documents, then at Cameron, then back at the documents again. The truth finally settled into place. His son hadn't just lost money. He had stolen it. My father's face turned gray. No. Cameron stared at the table. Dad. No. Richard stood abruptly. His chair nearly tipped over. Tell me she is lying. Cameron said nothing. Tell me. Silence. Tell me. Richard roared. Cameron finally looked up. Tears rolled down his face. I couldn't stop. The confession destroyed whatever remained of the illusion. My father staggered backward. For 36 years, Cameron had been the perfect son, the future of the family, the proof that Richard Anderson had done everything right. Now that fantasy was collapsing in front of 50 witnesses, my mother was openly sobbing. Aunt Pamela looked horrified. Several relatives refused to make eye contact with anyone. Then Diana delivered the next blow. Unfortunately, she said calmly, the gambling losses are only part of the problem. Every head turned toward her. Cameron immediately went pale. Not nervous. Terrified. Pure terror. Diana slowly removed another document. Unlike the others, this one carried legal seals and official filing stamps. My stomach tightened. Something about this paper felt different. More serious. Much more serious. My father noticed it too. What is that? Diana looked directly at him. The reason federal investigators became interested in Vanguard Holdings. Complete silence. Cameron lowered his head. My mother stopped crying. Even the ocean seemed to disappear. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly everyone understood. This wasn't about family anymore. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about prison. And judging by the look on Cameron's face, he already knew exactly how this story was going to end. The word prison sat over the table like a death sentence. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but everyone felt it. My mother's face had gone completely blank. My father stared at Cameron as if he were looking at a stranger wearing his son's suit. Cameron kept his head down, his hands locked together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. For the first time, I saw something in him I had never expected to see. Shame. Real shame. Not embarrassment because he had been caught. Not anger because his image had cracked. Shame because the truth had finally become too heavy to outrun. Diana placed the stamped document on the table and turned it so my father could read it. Federal investigators flagged several irregular wire transfers tied to Vanguard Holdings 6 months ago, she said. At first, it looked like internal misclassification. Then the pattern changed. Richard swallowed hard. What pattern? Diana pointed to the second page. Client trust accounts were used to cover personal gambling losses, offshore betting debts, and short-term liquidity gaps inside the firm. My mother made a broken sound. No. Cameron closed his eyes. Mom. No, she repeated, shaking her head like a child. Not you. Not my son. I looked at her when she said that. My son. Not our son. Not Cameron. My son. Even now, even with evidence on the table, she was reaching for the version of him she loved most. The perfect one. The one who made her look successful. My father's voice came out low and dangerous. How many accounts? Cameron did not answer. Diana did. At least 14 confirmed. A collective gasp moved through the relatives. 14. Not one mistake. Not one desperate transfer. A pattern. A system. A crime repeated enough times to become a habit. Richard gripped the edge of the table. How much? Diana paused. Not for drama. For mercy. Current confirmed exposure is approximately $7.2 million. My mother staggered backward. Rachel, who had quietly returned to the edge of the terrace with mascara streaked down her cheeks and no fiancé beside her, let out a strangled cry. Nobody had noticed her come back. Now everybody did. She stared at Cameron with hatred and terror. 7 million? She whispered. Cameron looked at her and something ugly flashed across his face. Don't act innocent. Rachel flinched. I didn't steal from clients. No, Cameron snapped. You just spent the money. Rachel's face twisted. You told me it was yours. Because you didn't want to hear anything else. Their voices rose again, but this time nobody stopped them. The family was too stunned, too broken. My father suddenly slammed his palm against the table. Enough. The word cracked through the air. Cameron and Rachel both froze. Richard looked at Cameron with a kind of controlled rage I had never seen before. You used client trust money? Cameron's lips trembled. I was going to put it back. My father laughed once. It was a horrible sound. That is what every thief says. Cameron's face collapsed. For a second, he looked 12 years old. I was scared. Nobody expected that. Not from Cameron. Not from the Golden Sun. His voice shook as he continued. I was scared of failing. I was scared of telling you the firm was bleeding. I was scared you would look at me the way you looked at Lydia. The entire terrace went silent. My father froze. My mother stopped crying. Even I stopped breathing for a moment. Cameron looked at me then, and for the first time all day, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only damage. I watched what happened when she disappointed you, he said quietly. I watched you erase her from the family while she was still living in the house. I knew if I failed, I would be next. Something inside me tightened. I hated him. I pitied him. Both feelings existed at the same time, and I did not know what to do with either one. My father's face hardened. Do not blame me for your crimes. I'm not blaming you, Cameron said. I'm telling you where I learned to be terrified of losing. That sentence landed harder than all the numbers, because everyone knew it was true. Richard had built our family like a trophy case. Useful children were displayed. Broken children were hidden. Cameron had not stolen because he was poor. He had stolen because he could not survive becoming me. My mother suddenly turned on me. Are you happy now? She screamed. Her voice was raw and shaking. Is this what you wanted? You wanted revenge, and now your brother's life is over. I stared at her. The old reflex almost rose in me. Apologize. Soften. Make her less angry. Take the blame so the room can breathe again. But I did not. No, I said. Cameron's choices ended Cameron's life as he knew it. Not me. Barbara's eyes burned. You brought those papers here because you tried to force me to invest in his firm. You could have said no privately. You announced my money publicly. Silence. She had no answer. Diana closed the folder halfway, then spoke again. There is another issue. My father looked like he could not physically absorb another word. What now? Diana glanced at me. I nodded. She opened the final page in that section. Several documents suggest Richard and Barbara Anderson may have been warned about the irregularities before tonight. The table went completely still. My mother's mouth opened. My father's face turned to stone. That is false, Richard said immediately. Too immediately. Diana slid a printed email across the table. This message was sent from Vanguard's internal risk officer to your personal email account 4 months ago. Richard did not touch it. He only stared. My mother whispered. Richard, he snapped. Be quiet. That one command told everyone enough. The perfect patriarch had known something. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the full 7 million. But enough. Enough to protect Cameron. Enough to stay silent. Enough to turn tonight's family dinner into a public attempt to make me pour my money into a sinking ship. My throat tightened. Not from surprise. From disgust. I looked at my father and finally understood the real trap. They were not asking me to help family. They were trying to use my money to bury evidence. My father slowly lifted his eyes to mine. For the first time, he did not look angry. He looked afraid. And that fear told me the next truth was going to be worse than anything we had already heard. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The ocean breeze moved across the terrace, but everything else felt frozen. My father continued staring at the email Diana had placed in front of him. My mother looked pale. Cameron sat motionless. Rachel stood near the edge of the terrace with dried mascara streaks running down her face. The perfect family had finally run out of excuses. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired, exhausted, empty. 33 years of fighting for a place in this family had left scars nobody could see. My father slowly looked up from the documents. For the first time all evening, he wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He simply looked defeated. Why didn't you tell us? He asked quietly. The question stunned me, not because of the words, because of who was asking them. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it hurt. Tell you what? I asked. Richard swallowed. How much all of this affected you? Complete silence. My mother looked down. Cameron closed his eyes. Rachel stopped crying. For a moment, nobody moved. Then something happened that I never expected. The anger I had carried all day suddenly disappeared. In its place came something much heavier. Sadness. I looked around the terrace. 50 relatives watching, listening, waiting. And for the first time in my life, I stopped protecting my family. Do you really want to know? I asked. Nobody answered. They didn't need to. I took a slow breath. The day I graduated from MIT, the words immediately changed the atmosphere. My mother looked up. My father froze. I continued. I called home 17 times that week. Silence. I left messages for both of you. My father's face slowly drained of color. Lydia. I wanted my family there. My voice remained calm, but inside I could feel the memory reopening. It was the biggest day of my life. 4 years of work, 4 years of sleeping on floors, 4 years of working 3 jobs, 4 years of wondering if I was good enough. Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their food. I called 17 times. I repeated. Nobody answered. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Real tears. I continued anyway. Graduation day arrived. Families were everywhere. Parents taking pictures. Brothers and sisters hugging each other. Everybody celebrating. I swallowed. The memory still hurt after all these years. I kept looking toward the entrance. Silence. Every time the doors opened, I thought maybe this was the moment. My voice nearly broke. Maybe my family finally came. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked down. I continued. But nobody came. Complete silence. The waves crashed below the cliffs. Somewhere in the distance, a seagull cried out. Nobody at the table moved. After the ceremony ended, everyone left with their families. I stared out at the ocean. I sat on a bench outside the auditorium by myself. My throat tightened. Still hoping. Rachel started crying again. Cameron couldn't look at me anymore. Do you know who finally showed up? I asked quietly. Nobody answered. My roommate's mother. The silence became unbearable. She saw me sitting alone. She walked over, gave me a hug, took a picture with me. I smiled sadly. The only graduation photo I have contains someone else's mother. My mother began openly sobbing. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. 3 days later, I continued. I finally got a call back. My father looked like he already knew. Deep down, he remembered. Dad called. Richard shut his eyes. He asked how graduation went. Nobody breathed. Then he told me he couldn't make it because Rachel had a beauty pageant that weekend. My mother's sobs grew louder. My father looked completely broken. And the worst part? I asked quietly. Nobody answered. I actually believed him. Tears finally reached my own eyes. I convinced myself it made sense. I told myself family was busy. I told myself I wasn't important enough to deserve disappointment. Complete silence. That's what happens when you're treated like the practice child long enough. Several relatives wiped tears from their eyes. Aunt Susan looked devastated. Uncle Thomas stared at the table. Even Diana looked away for a moment. So when everyone asks why I stopped calling, I continued, or why I stopped visiting, I looked directly at my parents. That's why. My mother's shoulders shook violently. Lydia, she whispered. But for the first time in 33 years, I wasn't interested in hearing what came next. Because the little girl who sat alone on that graduation bench had spent years waiting for an apology. And eventually she learned something important. Some apologies arrived too late to change anything. Then my father did something nobody expected. Richard Anderson, the proud patriarch of the family, the man who had never apologized for anything in his entire life, slowly stood up from his chair. Tears filled his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. My God, he whispered, What have I done? Nobody moved after my father's words. The entire terrace remained silent as Richard Anderson stood beside the table looking like a man who had just awakened from a 30-year dream and discovered his life was built on lies. My mother continued crying quietly into her hands. Cameron stared at the ground. Rachel sat frozen. Even the relatives seemed unsure what to do. For the first time all day, nobody was defending anyone. Nobody was making excuses. Nobody was pretending. The truth had stripped away every mask. My father slowly lowered himself back into his chair. He looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Older. "I don't remember the graduation," he said quietly. The words hurt more than they should have. Not because he missed it, because it wasn't important enough for him to remember missing it. I smiled sadly. "I know." Richard closed his eyes. My mother wiped tears from her face. "We were wrong," she whispered. The sentence should have felt satisfying. For years I imagined hearing those words. But now that they finally arrived, they felt empty. Too late. Much too late. "Wrong?" I asked softly. "You weren't wrong once. You were wrong for decades." Nobody argued. Nobody could. My father nodded slowly. "You're right." The admission shocked several relatives. Richard Anderson never admitted he was wrong. Never. Yet there he sat doing exactly that. For a brief moment, I thought the night might finally be over. Then Diana quietly reached into her briefcase. The movement immediately caught my attention. Something about her expression changed. Not nervous, not emotional. Serious. Extremely serious. My father noticed too. "What is it?" Diana hesitated. For the first time all evening she seemed uncomfortable. That frightened me more than anything else. Because Diana was never uncomfortable. "There is one more matter," she said carefully. My stomach tightened. My father looked confused. "What matter?" Diana glanced toward me, then toward my parents, then back to the folder. "A document was discovered during the acquisition review." My mother frowned. "What document?" Nobody answered immediately. The silence stretched. Finally, Diana removed a thin manila envelope from her briefcase. Unlike the other files, this one looked old. Very old. The edges were worn, slightly faded. My father stared at it. Something changed in his face. Recognition, then fear. Real fear. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. Diana didn't answer. My father's hands started trembling. My mother noticed. "Richard?" He ignored her. His eyes never left the envelope. I had never seen my father afraid before. Not like this. Suddenly my heartbeat accelerated. Whatever was inside that envelope mattered. A lot. Diana carefully placed it on the table. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "During due diligence," she explained, "several archived records connected to the Anderson family were uncovered." My father's face turned completely pale. "No." It came out as a whisper. My mother looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Richard stood up so suddenly his chair nearly fell backward. "No!" This time louder. Desperate. My mother stared at him. "Richard, what is happening?" He didn't answer. That terrified her. It terrified me too. Because for the first time all day, my father wasn't worried about Cameron. He wasn't worried about money. He wasn't worried about reputation. He was terrified of something else. Something buried. Something old. Diana slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single document. 1 page. That's all. Just 1 page. Yet my father looked like he was watching a bomb being armed. "Dad?" Rachel whispered. Richard remained frozen. Diana carefully slid the paper across the table toward me. "You deserve to see this." My hands felt strangely cold as I picked it up. The document was dated 23 years earlier, long before MIT, long before my company, long before most of the pain I remembered. I frowned. "What is this?" Nobody answered. Then I saw the heading, Family Counseling Evaluation Report. My breath caught. 23 years ago. I kept reading. Then I saw my name. Lydia Anderson, age 10. The world around me suddenly seemed quieter, Further away. My eyes moved lower down the page. Then everything stopped. I read the sentence once, then twice, then a third time, because my brain refused to accept it. My mother leaned forward. Lydia? I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking. Richard looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Finally, I managed to force the words out. You took me to a child psychologist? My mother blinked. What? I looked at her. Then at my father. When I was 10. Nobody answered. I looked back at the report. Then I found the section that changed everything. Recommendation. Child demonstrates healthy emotional development. Primary emotional distress appears linked to repeated parental favoritism and exclusion within the family environment. Complete silence. The words sat there in black and white. Written by a licensed professional more than 2 decades ago. Before MIT. Before the company. Before every excuse my parents ever made. The psychologist had seen it immediately. My father lowered his head. My mother looked completely confused. What does that mean? She whispered. I stared at the report. Then continued reading. Recommendation. Parents advised to immediately cease comparative treatment of children and engage in structured family therapy. Failure to address current dynamics may result in long-term emotional harm to the child. My mother looked horrified. Richard. My father said nothing. I turned another page. Attached to the report was a signature. Richard Anderson. He had read it. He had signed it. 23 years ago. He knew. The realization hit me harder than anything that happened all day. Harder than the insults. Harder than the graduation story. Harder than the reunion itself. My father hadn't accidentally failed me. He hadn't been unaware. He hadn't misunderstood. He knew. For 23 years. He knew. Tears filled my eyes. Not because I was sad anymore. Because something inside me had finally broken free. The doubt. The questioning. The wondering whether maybe I had imagined it. Whether maybe I had been too sensitive. Whether maybe I wasn't good enough. The report destroyed all of it. I had never been the problem. A trained professional had told my parents that 23 years ago. And they ignored it. My mother looked at Richard like she was seeing him for the first time. You knew? She whispered. Richard couldn't look at her. Couldn't look at me. Couldn't look at anyone. Then, in a voice barely audible above the waves crashing below the cliffs, he answered, Yes. The entire terrace froze, because suddenly everyone understood something terrible. Everything that happened to me wasn't a mistake. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't bad parenting. It was a choice. And for the first time all night, even my mother looked at my father with horror. Nobody recovered from my father's confession. Not immediately. The ocean breeze continued moving through the terrace, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Earlier, my family looked shocked. Now they looked exposed. 23 years. 23 years my father had known exactly what was happening. 23 years he had ignored professional warnings. 23 years of pretending the problem was me. My mother stared at him in disbelief. You never told me. Richard remained silent. Richard. Her voice cracked. You never told me. My father looked exhausted. Broken. For the first time all day, he seemed incapable of defending himself. Finally, he spoke. Because I didn't agree with it. Complete silence. My mother blinked. What? Richard rubbed his face. I thought the psychologist was wrong. Several relatives stared at him in disbelief. He continued anyway. I thought Lydia was too sensitive. I thought she needed to toughen up. I thought competition would make her stronger. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was tragic. Competition? I asked. Richard nodded weakly. I wanted all of you to succeed. So you humiliated one child to motivate her? Silence. My father looked away. The answer was obvious. My mother suddenly stood up. No. Everyone looked at her. Tears streamed down her face. No, Richard. Don't do that. Richard frowned. What? Barbara shook her head. Don't put this entirely on yourself. The terrace went quiet. Something about her voice felt different, not defensive, not manipulative, honest, dangerously honest. My stomach tightened. My mother looked at me, then down at the table, then back at me again. There is something you don't know. The words immediately changed everything. Richard's head snapped up. Barbara. She ignored him. Mom? Rachel whispered. My mother closed her eyes. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she finally forced the words out. The psychologist wasn't the only person who warned us. Complete silence. Richard looked horrified. Absolutely horrified. Barbara, stop. She turned toward him. Just stop. My father froze. Because for the first time in decades, Barbara Anderson wasn't following his lead. She looked back at me. There was another report. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A teacher. My heartbeat accelerated. When you were 11. Confusion spread through the relatives. My mother continued. Your teacher requested a meeting. I stared at her. Why? Barbara swallowed hard. Because she thought you were depressed. The world suddenly felt very far away. What? My mother started crying again. She said you spent lunch alone every day. Silence. She said you never talked about home. My chest tightened. She said you constantly compared yourself to Rachel and Cameron. Nobody breathed. She told us she was worried you felt unwanted. My hands began trembling. Not from anger. From memory. I remembered that teacher. Mrs. Harrison. She used to leave encouraging notes on my homework. She used to save a seat for me during school events. I never understood why. Now I did. My mother looked directly into my eyes. She asked us if something was wrong at home. Tears rolled down her cheeks. And what did you say? I asked quietly. Barbara broke. Completely. I lied. The words echoed across the terrace. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. My mother covered her face with both hands. I told her you were dramatic. More tears. I told her you wanted attention. My throat tightened painfully. I told her she didn't understand our family. The silence became unbearable. My father looked sick. Rachel was crying again. Cameron stared at the table. I couldn't speak. For years I had wondered if people noticed, if anybody saw what was happening. The answer was yes. They saw. They tried to help. And my parents shut them out. Why? I finally whispered. My mother lowered her hands. Her face was covered in tears. Because I was ashamed. Complete silence. Ashamed? My voice barely worked. Barbara nodded. Rachel was beautiful. More tears. Cameron was successful. She looked down, and every time I looked at you, my heart stopped. The entire terrace froze. Even Richard looked terrified. My mother couldn't continue. She physically couldn't, but everyone already understood where the sentence was going. Mom, Rachel whispered. Barbara finally forced herself to say it. Every time I looked at you, her voice shattered. I saw everything I hated about myself. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The words hung in the air like an explosion. My father stared at her, shocked. Rachel looked confused. Cameron looked stunned. I simply sat there, frozen. Because for the first time in 33 years, somebody had finally told the truth. Not about me, about them. My mother wasn't cruel because I was unworthy. She was cruel because she saw her own insecurities reflected in me. Barbara continued crying. You looked like I looked when I was young. My eyes widened. What? She nodded. Same face. More tears. Same smile. Her shoulders shook. Same awkwardness. Suddenly pieces started falling into place. Old photographs. Old comments. Old arguments. Things that never made sense before. Barbara wasn't comparing me to Rachel. She was comparing me to herself. And she hated what she saw. I spent years trying to fix you. She laughed bitterly, when the truth was that I hated myself. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what to say, because this wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about favoritism anymore. This was something darker, something deeper. My mother looked directly at me. You were never the problem, Lydia. Tears filled my eyes. Not because I forgave her, not because everything was suddenly okay, but because after 33 years, somebody finally said the words I needed to hear. You were never the problem. My father slowly lowered his head. The relatives remained silent. The waves crashed below the cliffs, and for the first time that entire day, nobody was thinking about money, scandals, gambling, or ruined weddings. They were all staring at the real disaster. Two parents who spent decades breaking a child because they couldn't face their own failures. Then Diana quietly spoke. There is one final document. Every head turned toward her. My father closed his eyes. Because somehow he already knew exactly which document she meant, the words one final document should have frightened me. After everything that had already happened, I thought there could not possibly be anything left. Cameron's crimes had been exposed. Rachel's perfect engagement had collapsed. My father's silence had been revealed. My mother's cruelty had finally been named. What else could there be? But the look on my father's face told me Diana was not exaggerating. He knew. He had known from the moment he saw the old envelope. My mother turned toward him slowly. Richard? He did not answer. His eyes stayed locked on Diana's briefcase. Diana removed the final document with unusual care. It was not thick, it was not dramatic. Just 3 pages, clipped together, slightly yellowed at the edges. But my father looked at it like it was the end of him. Diana placed it in front of me. This was filed when you were 17. My breath caught. 17. The year everything changed. The year MIT became real. The year my parents refused to help me. The year I learned that my future belonged only to me because nobody in that house cared whether I had one. I looked down at the first page. At first, the legal language blurred. Then I saw the title. Education Trust Disbursement Authorization. My fingers went cold. What is this? I whispered. Nobody answered. My father closed his eyes. My mother leaned closer, confused. Education Trust? Diana's voice was gentle but clear. Your maternal grandfather created a college fund for Lydia shortly before he passed away. The terrace went utterly silent. My mother stopped breathing. I looked at her. She looked as shocked as I felt. Grandpa? I whispered. Diana nodded. The account was designated specifically for your higher education, full tuition, housing, and living expenses. The words did not make sense. Not at first. My brain rejected them because they contradicted the story I had carried for half my life. I had worked 3 jobs. I had skipped meals. I had slept in an apartment with no heat. I had cried in library bathrooms because I did not know if I could afford the next semester. And all that time, there had been money. Money meant for me. Money left by the only older relative who had ever treated me gently. My mother turned to my father. Her voice was barely audible. Richard, what did you do? He still did not answer. Diana slid the second page forward. The trust was liquidated 2 weeks after Lydia's MIT acceptance letter arrived. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Liquidated? Diana nodded. Yes. I looked at my father. Where did it go? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Diana answered for him. A portion was transferred into Cameron's undergraduate investment account. Cameron's head snapped up. What? Diana continued. Another portion was used as a down payment on Rachel's Mercedes convertible. Rachel covered her mouth. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a sob and a gasp. I stared at my father. The entire terrace disappeared. All I could see was him. The man who told me MIT was too expensive. The man who refused to co-sign my loans. The man who said investing in me was too risky. The money had been there. He took it. He gave it to them. And then he watched me struggle. My voice came out quiet. Too quiet. You stole my college fund, Richard flinched. I was managing family resources. The words detonated something inside me. Not rage, something cleaner, colder, final. No, I said. You stole it. My mother turned on him completely. You told me her father never left anything. Richard looked at her sharply. Barbara, you told me there was no trust. Her voice rose. You told me my father only left small personal gifts. Tears streamed down her face. You lied to me too. For the first time all day, my father had no loyal audience left. Cameron stared at him in horror. Rachel was crying again, but this time not for herself. Several relatives looked disgusted. Aunt Pamela actually stepped away from him. Richard stood slowly, trying to gather what remained of his authority. I did what was necessary. Nobody spoke. He looked around the table, desperate for someone to understand. Cameron's education mattered for the family business. Rachel's car was part of maintaining appearances during her social season. Lydia had scholarships. She was resourceful. She could manage. I stared at him. I was 17, he swallowed. You were capable. I was a child. The words broke through the air. My father looked away. You survived. I laughed once, and it sounded nothing like happiness. That is your defense? Silence. You stole from a child, watched her suffer, then congratulated yourself because she didn't die under the weight of it. Nobody moved. Diana stood beside me silently, not protecting me from the truth this time, letting me face it, letting everyone face it. My mother walked around the table and slapped my father across the face. The sound cracked across the terrace. Every person froze. Richard touched his cheek, stunned. Barbara's entire body shook. You let me hate my own daughter? She whispered. You fed every ugly thing inside me because it was easier than admitting you robbed her. Richard's expression hardened. Do not pretend you were innocent. Barbara flinched. No, she said through tears. I was cruel, I was weak, I was jealous, but I did not know this. My father looked at me then, and for one brief moment I thought maybe he would apologize. Not perform an apology. Not defend himself inside an apology. Just say the words. Instead, he straightened his tie. You became successful anyway. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I did not realize until then that some small, foolish part of me had still been waiting for my father to become a father, but he had never been one. He had been a curator. A man arranging children like trophies and moving resources to whichever one made his display look best. I picked up the trust document and folded it carefully. Diana, I said. Yes? File the civil claim. My father's eyes widened. What? I looked at him. For misappropriation of trust funds. Richard stepped toward me. You would sue your own father? I held his gaze. No. I am suing the man who stole from me. The silence was absolute. Diana nodded once. The paperwork is ready. My father looked around the table for help. Nobody came. Not Cameron. Not Rachel. Not Barbara. Not Pamela. Nobody. At last, the patriarch stood alone. Then I looked at my mother. She could barely meet my eyes. I am not doing this because I need the money, I said. I am doing it because every person at this table needs to understand that what happened to me was not discipline. It was not parenting. It was theft, neglect, and emotional abuse dressed up as family values. My voice did not shake. And tonight, it ends. For the first time, nobody argued. Nobody called me dramatic. Nobody called me sensitive. Nobody called me ugly. They simply sat there while the truth finally took its rightful seat at the head of the table. Then, from the driveway, the distant sound of sirens began to rise. 1 year later, I stood backstage at the Anderson Foundation Scholarship Ceremony, listening to the sound of hundreds of conversations filling the auditorium. The room was packed with students, parents, teachers, mentors, and community leaders. Every seat was occupied. Every face carried hope. As I looked through the curtain toward the audience, I found myself thinking about a very different room, a different crowd, a different day. 1 year earlier, I had stood at the head of a family table while decades of lies collapsed around me. Back then, I thought justice would feel like victory. I thought exposing the truth would heal everything. I was wrong. Justice doesn't erase pain. It simply stops the pain from continuing. Healing is a completely different journey. The lawsuit against my father ended 6 months earlier. The court ordered restitution and publicly documented the misuse of my trust fund. Financially, it changed very little for me. Emotionally, it changed everything. For the first time in my life, there was proof. Proof that I had never imagined the favoritism. Proof that I had never exaggerated the neglect. Proof that I was never the problem. That mattered more than any amount of money ever could. Cameron's life changed dramatically after the reunion. The plea agreement ended his professional career. Several friends disappeared. Business contacts stopped calling. People who once admired him suddenly wanted nothing to do with him. At first, he blamed everyone else. Me, the investigators, Diana, the market, bad luck. But eventually there was nobody left to blame. 8 months after the reunion, he entered treatment for gambling addiction. For the first time in his life, he stopped pretending to be the smartest person in every room. The last time we spoke, he looked exhausted but honest. I never thought I would use those two words to describe Cameron. Honest, humble, broken in a way that might finally allow him to heal. Rachel's story ended differently. Losing Preston forced her to confront something she had spent her entire life avoiding. She had built her identity around being admired, around being chosen, around being the beautiful daughter everyone celebrated. When that disappeared, she had no idea who she was. For months, she struggled. Then something unexpected happened. She started rebuilding her life away from our family's influence. No luxury parties, no social status, no attention, just work. Real work. The kind I had been doing since I was 18 years old. 6 weeks before the scholarship ceremony, she called me. It was the first honest conversation we had ever shared. She cried. I cried. Neither of us tried to defend the past. For the first time, we simply told the truth. My mother changed the most, not because she became perfect, not because she deserved immediate forgiveness, because she finally stopped lying to herself. She spent the year volunteering at youth programs and mentoring girls who struggled with confidence. One afternoon, she told me something I will never forget. She said, "Every time I meet a girl who feels invisible, I see you." Then she started crying. So did I. Not because everything was fixed, because accountability is rare, especially from people who spent decades avoiding it. My father remained the hardest story of all. Richard Anderson lost the lawsuit, lost his reputation, lost the admiration of many relatives. But none of those losses changed him the way I once hoped they would. Some people spend so much time protecting their pride that they eventually become prisoners of it. My father never truly apologized. Not because he didn't know he was wrong, because admitting the full truth would require him to face who he had become. A few months after the court case ended, I received a letter from him. No excuses, no legal language, no arguments, just one sentence. "I don't know how to fix what I broke." I stared at those words for a very long time. Then I put the letter away, because the truth was that some things cannot be fixed. Some relationships cannot be restored to what they should have been. The best outcome is learning how to move forward anyway. A volunteer interrupted my thoughts and told me it was time to begin. I walked onto the stage as the audience erupted into applause. Hundreds of students looked toward me. Some smiled nervously. Some looked overwhelmed. Some looked exactly the way I felt when I was young and desperately hoping somebody would believe in me. I stepped to the microphone and looked across the room. Then I began speaking. I told them about rejection. I told them about failure. I told them that the people who doubt you are not always strangers. Sometimes they are the people sitting at your own dinner table. The room became completely silent. Every student listened. Every parent listened. Every teacher listened. Then I told them something I wish someone had told me when I was 10 years old. Your worth does not decrease because someone else fails to recognize it. The audience applauded. Some students wiped tears from their eyes. Some parents held their children's hands. And for the first time all day, I felt something I never expected. Peace. After the ceremony ended, students lined up to receive their awards. One young girl stood near the back of the line, clutching her acceptance letter so tightly it looked like she was afraid it might disappear. When she finally reached me, she looked terrified. "Miss Anderson," she whispered, "my family thinks I can't do this. For a moment, the entire room disappeared. I wasn't standing on a stage anymore. I was 10 years old again, standing in a hallway, listening to my parents call me the practice child, the mistake, the disappointment. Then, I was 18 again, sitting alone after graduation while everyone else celebrated with their families. Then I was 22, working 3 jobs, wondering if anyone would ever believe in me. Every version of myself existed inside that moment. I smiled at the young girl. Then I handed her the scholarship certificate. "Do you know something?" I asked. She shook her head. "The people who underestimate you do not get to decide your future." Tears filled her eyes immediately. A second later, tears filled mine too. We laughed through the awkwardness and took a picture together. As she walked away, I watched her disappear into the crowd of students preparing to begin their lives. Then I noticed something unexpected. My mother was standing near the exit. She had attended quietly without telling me. Beside her stood Rachel. A few feet away stood Cameron. None of them approached the stage. None of them tried to make the moment about themselves. They simply watched. Then my mother smiled. Not the smile she used to wear at parties. Not the smile she used when she wanted approval. A different smile. A proud smile. The kind I spent most of my life wishing to see. I felt tears forming again. Not because the past was gone. Not because everything was forgiven. Because after 33 years, she finally saw me. Really saw me. As the crowd slowly exited the auditorium, I stepped outside and watched the sunset spread across the horizon. The sky glowed gold and orange. My phone buzzed. A message had arrived. It was a photograph from my mother. The picture showed me at 10 years old holding a science fair trophy. I remembered that day. I remembered searching the audience for my family and finding empty seats. Attached to the photo was a single sentence. "I should have been there." I stared at the message for several minutes. Then I smiled. Not because the pain disappeared, not because the scars vanished, but because the little girl in that photograph had spent years believing she wasn't enough. She spent years trying to earn love from people who were too damaged to give it. What she never understood was that she had always been enough. She always would be. The mistake was never the child. The mistake belonged to the people who failed to recognize her worth. I looked toward the horizon one last time and felt the weight of 33 years finally leave my shoulders. I was no longer the ugly duckling. I was no longer the practice child. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was Lydia Anderson. And for the first time in my entire life, that was more than enough.